And and we're so delighted to be with you again together as a community. I do want to let you know that this is our first time in 16 months, with one small exception, we've had people in the congregation with us. Very scary and quite wonderful, actually. I will let you know that we spent the last 60 months staring up at a camera, learning how to look up at a camera and pretending that we're in your homes. So really it's quite a delight to see all your faces with each other. And as we go through the service, I encourage you to kind of make sure your voices are heard very quietly through your masks as we move forward. I'm happy to see that you're all sitting in appropriate bubbles along the way, and this is kind of the way of the future. And in many ways, I'm so delighted to say that this morning is not only a bar mitzvah, but it's also an expression of hope. That we're coming together finally as a community, we're seeing changes, and we're finding ways to gather and to appreciate what it is to see and feel and touch each other. This morning with Alex here, we almost leaned over and almost gave each other a handshake, because there's still old tendencies for us to not be isolated and fearful, but to want to connect to each other. And that's why things like a bar mitzvah in particular is such an auspicious and wonderful way for us to come together again as a congregation, realizing that we are connecting up not only families, but generations to generations as we go through. As I mentioned, we do our services normally on Friday nights at Temple Shalom, but we also do Saturday morning services when appropriate. And in every respect, this will be a regular Saturday morning service, with one exception, that in the middle of it at various points, we'll be asking Carson to take on roles as a member of the congregation, but also as a service leader. So for example, Carson will be coming up to do some readings, he'll be doing some songs, and in the middle of the service, when we bring out the Torah, he'll be joining his uncle Stephen and his father Brian, and he too, each of them will take turns chanting the Torah. And it's in that moment of having his Aliyah that he's taking on the concept of becoming a bar mitzvah, a son of the commandments, essentially stepping into Jewish adulthood, when he becomes responsible himself for all of the acts that he does. He moves away from his parents' responsibility and obligations to take responsibility to taking on those things themselves. Of course, at the end, Carson will also become our teacher, and he'll take my place on the bima, and instead of me delivering a sermon or a Devar Torah, a commentary about the Torah, that'll become Carson's responsibility as a young Jewish adult to teach us about what he's learned about the Torah, what's important to him, and hopefully messages that we can take away into our lives as well. So with that, we're going to move into the service, and what I'd like to do is have you open up your Mishkan Tefillah on page 185. It's a meditation of sorts, and what I'm going to do is actually ask you to read responsively, which means I'll read the first two lines, and then you respond with the second two, and then we'll continue back and forth. This is very much of a Reformed tradition, where we actually share the responsibility rather than us kind of, quote, performing to you, where your voices matter. And I found that my first experiences that were here 30 years ago really brought me into contact with prayer myself. So these prayers become my prayers rather than those being delivered from the bima itself. So in the middle of page 185, may the door of the synagogue be wide enough to receive all who hunger for love, all who are lonely for friendship. Together, may it welcome all who have cares to unburden, thanks to express, and hopes to nurture. May the door of the synagogue be narrow enough to shut out pettiness and pride, envy and enmity. May its threshold be no stumbling block to young or straying feet. May it be too high to admit complacency, selfishness, and harshness. And may the synagogue be for all who enter the doorway to a richer and more meaningful life. And with that reading, we're creating sacred space. We're separating the world of the mundane outside from the sacred community and the sacred place that we have here right now. And with that, I'm going to invite Carson up. He's going to be up here for the rest of the morning with us from Modeh Ani, which is on page 186.
Mode ani lefanecha, melech chai v'kayam. Mode ani lefanecha, melech chai v'kayam.
שהחזרת בי נשמתי בחמלה.
Rabbi Munatecha, Rabbi Munatecha. I offer thanks to you, ever-living sovereign. I offer thanks to you, ever-living sovereign.
That you restored my soul to me in mercy.
How great is your trust? How great is your trust?
מודה אני לפניך,
מלך חי וקיים. מודה אני לפניך, מלך חי וקיים. שהחזרת בי נשמתי בחמלה. Rabbi Munatecha, Rabbi Munatecha,
Rabbi
Munatecha, Rabbi Munatecha.
I'd like to invite up Brian and Lindsay Hyman as we now pass on their first Talit to Carson.
Good morning, everybody. Rabbi Allen encouraged me to make some remarks relating to Carson's Talit at this time. The Talit is a prayer shawl that is worn while praying in the synagogue at specific times. This Talit here, that Carson's going to put on in 1 second, is a gift from Carson's Bubby and Zeta. They reminded me recently that my Talit that I'm wearing today was a gift from my grandparents. So Carson, your Bubby and Zeta spent a great deal of time picking out this beautiful Talit on the occasion of your bar mitzvah. And with the gift of your Talit, your Bubby and Zeta will be with you on special occasions in the synagogue throughout your lifetime.
Baruch atah Adonai Elokeinu melech haolam asher kichanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu litatef b'tzitzit.
Amen.
We're going to continue with Ma Tovu, which in your books is 192, and again, this will be Carson taking this on.
Ma tovu ochalecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Israel va'ani berov chastecha avo vetecha Eshtachave el Chehal Kodshecha Be'yiratecha Adonai Achavti Mion Be'itecha ומקום משכן כבודך, ואני אשתחווה ואכרע אברע לפני אדוני עושי, ואני תפילתי לך אדוני את רצון אלוהים ברוב חסדך ענני באמת אישך.
On page 193, Carson's going to continue with another reading.
May the one whose spirit is with us in every righteous deed be with all who work for the God of humanity and bear the burdens of others, and who give bread to the hunger, who clothe the naked and take the friendliness into their homes. May the work of their hands endure, and may the seed they sow bring abundant harvest.
We're going to continue right now with the Chatzi Kaddish, the half Kaddish on page 224, which is essentially the beginning of our formal morning prayers. I'm going to ask you, depending on your custom, we rise either at the beginning or the end of the Chatzi Kaddish, but certainly be standing by the end as we continue on to the Barach. In your books, it's on page 224, and we'll be continuing straight after that on to page 226.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, וילמד יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי, וחייכון וביומכון וחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן הקריב, ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם ולעלמי עלמיה יתברך. יתברך וישתבח ויפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ויאמרו אמן. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya ya la la la. Ya ya la la la. Ya la 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 la. Ya ya la la la. Ya ya la la la. Ya la 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 la. Barach hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach. HaMevorach Leolam Vaed. HaMevorach Mevorach leolam vaed.
We'll continue on page 228. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam yotzer oram uvarei choshech oseh shalom uvarei het hakol ha'me'ir ha'aretz l'dvarim alehem barachamim. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, creator of light and darkness, who makes peace and fashions all things. In mercy, you illumine the world and those who live upon it. In your goodness, you daily renew creation. How numerous are your works, Adonai. In wisdom you formed them all, filling the earth with your creatures. Be praised, Adonai, our God, for the excellent work of your hands and for the lights you created. May they glorify you. Shine a new light upon Zion, that we may all swiftly merit its radiance. And praised are you, Adonai, creator of all heavenly lights, and together, Baruch Atah Adonai Yotzer HaMeorot. Page 230. There's a song of love. There's Ahavat Olam on Friday evening and Ahavah Rabbah in the morning. The prayer of God expressing God's love for the people of Israel by simply the granting of the Torah. How deeply you have loved us, Adonai, our God, gracing us with surpassing compassion on account of our forebears whose trust led you to teach them all the laws of life. Be gracious to us, teaching us as well. O merciful one, have mercy on us by making us able to understand and discern, to heed, learn, and teach, and lovingly to observe, perform, and fulfill all that is your Torah. We're going to stay standing for the Shema, the watchword of the Jewish people, on page 232. Carson.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Baruch Shem Kevod, Malchuto Leolam Vaed.
Baruch Shem Kevod, Malachuto, Leolam Vaed.
Please be seated. We'll continue with the Vahavta.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושינמתם לבניך ודיברת בהם, ושבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני Adonai Elohechem.
I'm going to pause for a moment and talk about the Shema. You know, the Shema is actually the precursor of all of our prayers. It shows up in the Torah in 3 different locations. The third location comes out of today's Torah Parsha, Ekev, in the book of Devarim. We won't be focusing on Ekev for reasons we'll talk about later on, but I do want to let you know that tonight in particular, I'm really mindful of how the Torah, written 2,500 years ago, still connects to us to this day by its presence in our prayer book as a central prayer of Judaism. I'm going to ask you to turn to page 239. And like we did before, I'd like us to read this responsibly, where I'll take the first 2 lines and you respond afterwards. The eternal truth is that you alone are God and there is none else. May the righteous of all nations rejoice in your love and exult in your justice. Let them beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. And together, let nation not lift up sword against nation, nor learn war anymore. You shall not hate your brother or your sister in your heart. The stranger that sojourns with you shall be accepted as your equal, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And why do you crush my people and oppress the poor, asks God. And together, we know that the Eternal One defends the poor and upholds the right of the needy. Praise to God Most High, and together, blessed is God, deserving of blessing. Micha Mocha on the following page.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, תורה תהילות אוספלת, תורה תהילות אוספלת. שירה חדשה שכחו גאולים, לשמחת הסבת הים, יחד כולם הודו, וימלכו ויאמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. Him the prophet took the timbrel in her hand, and all the women followed her, just as she had planned. And Miriam raised her voice in song. She sang with praise and might. We've just lived through a miracle. We're going to dance tonight. And the women dancing with their timbrels followed Miriam as she sang her song. Sing a song to the one whom we've exalted. Miriam and the women danced, and danced the whole night long. Tzur Yisrael, Kuma Be'ezrat Yisrael, Ufetekinu Mecha Yehuda Yisrael. Goaleinu Adonai Tzevaot Shemot, Kadosh Yisrael, Baruch atah Adonai, Gal Yisrael.
I'm going to turn to an English understanding of the Milchamacha on the following page, particularly appropriate, I think, in these challenging times. The good in us will win. Over all the wickedness, over all the wrongs we have done, we will look back at the pages of written history and be amazed, and then we will laugh and sing. And the good that is in us, children in their cradles, will have won. Our hearts beat with certainty that there is a day and an hour and a moment called Zion, and that all of the sufferings will gather there and become song, ringing out into every corner of the earth from end to end, and the nations will hear it, and like the caravans in a desert, will all to that morning throng. I'm going to ask you to rise again for the tefillah, the Amidah, which Amidah means to stand. So we're all going to stand right now for the prayers that start on page 242 in our prayer book, and we'll continue on through page 246, and after that we'll continue with the Mekadesh, the prayer of holiness, the Kedusha, on page 248.
Adonai sifatai tiftach, ufi yagid tehilatecha. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'le'avotenu v'imotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah. האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל העליון, ומלך חסדים טובים, וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות. ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם, ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם, אדוני מחיה כל אתה, רב להושיע. מוריד הטל, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר, מי כמוך בגבורות ומדם מהלך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי הכל. נקדש את שמך בעולם, כי שם שמקדשים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב על יד נביאך וקרא זה אל זה ויאמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלוא כל הארץ כבודו. אדיר אדירנו אדוני אדוננו, מאדיר שמך בכל הארץ. ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אחד הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו ומלכנו, הוא מושיענו והוא ישמיענו, ברחמיו לעיני כל חי. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהיך ציון לדור ודור. הללויה.
Ledor vador,
לדור ודור.
ledor vador,
לדור ודור.
ledor vador, nagid God lecha. Ledor vador,
לדור ודור.
ledor vador,
לדור ודור.
ledor vador, nagid God lecha.
ולנצח נצחים, ולנצח נצחים, קדושת חנקדיש בשבחך אלוהינו, מפינו לא ימוש, לא ימוש לעולם ועד.
Ledor vador,
לדור ודור.
ledor vador,
לדור ודור.
ledor vador, nagid God lecha. Ledor vador,
לדור ודור.
ledor vador, ledor vador, nagid God lecha. Baruch ata Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. Baruch ata Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh.
Please be seated. We're going to turn to Yismachu on page 250.
ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת, וקורא עונג שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, Shoimre, shoimre, shoimre Shabbat. The Kore Onek Shabbat. Aham Mekadeshe. Mekadeshe Shevi Shabbat. Ulam Yisveu. Veyitangu Mitovecha Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha shoimre, shoimre, shoimre Shabbat. Dekore onek Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha shoimre, shoimre, shoimre Shabbat. Dekore onek Shabbat. V'rashmi ratzita bo v'kidoshto Shabbat. Chemdat yamim oto karata Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha shoimre, shoimre, shoimre Shabbat. V'kore onek Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha shoimre, shoimre, shoimre Shabbat. V'kore onek Shabbat. Seichel Lamase v'reishit Shabbat. Seichel Lamase v'reishit Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha shoimre, shoimre, shoimre Shabbat. V'kore onek Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha shoimre, shoimre, shoimre Shabbat. V'kore onek Shabbat.
On page 255, let's read again responsively. We'll trade paragraphs back and forth in the middle of the page. On this holy Shabbat, may we draw nearer to life, to peace, and to joy. May we find true rest, holiness in our deeds, words in our study of Torah. Let us feed on the love of goodness. Let us drink from the love of goodness, restrain our thirst for excess, and clean our hearts to serve life well. And on this holy day, Shabbat, may we draw nearer to life in peace and in joy. And together, Baruch Atah Adonai, She'odcha levadcha v'yirkeah na'avod. We're going to move right now to the prayer of peace and coming up momentarily on page 258. But before we do so, I'm going to ask us all to take a few moments of quiet contemplation and meditation so we can choose the prayers that matter to us the most. Peace, we all struggle in different ways. Sometimes it's individually, sometimes it's in our homes, thinking of those around us who are struggling and the stress and increase our environment. Of course, our city, our province, our country, and the world around us. The most important thing right now is to find the prayer of peace that matters most to you. And later on, when we do the prayer, it kind of, we're doing these prayers underneath the prayer, which we'll express together in the Sim Shalom. So a few moments of peace.
So I've had the pleasure of having Carson and Brian come to visit me on my porch back in my house. And during this time when I had no visitors, I always looked forward to singing with Carson, and our ability to do that in this time of pandemic, and sharing with Carson some of the melodies that you're hearing today in our tefillah, in our prayer. And I just wanted to thank Brian and Carson for bringing a blessing to my house. The sweetness of their voices, and being able to sing together, to be together in a very human way. So we're going to share with you a newish kind of melody for the prayer for peace, the Sim Shalom. And maybe if you wouldn't mind just imagining the three of us just sitting on my back porch, singing this.
Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, Tova Uvracha.
Chen v'chesed v'rachamim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael amecha. Join us.
Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, Tova Uvracha.
That's it. Bachenu avinu kulanu kechad bior panecha ki bior panecha natata lanu Adonai Eloheinu.
Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, Tova Uvracha.
The Torah is life. Torah Chaim, Avat Chesed, Avat Chesed. Utzedaka uvracha, v'rachamim, v'chayim, v'shalom.
Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, Tova Uvracha.
And may it be good. V'tov enecha levarech et amcha Yisrael b'chol עת ובכל שעה בשלומך.
Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, Sim Shalom, Tova Uvracha.
Baruch atah
Adonai,
Hamavarech et Amo Yisrael Shalom.
Shalom.
We close off one chapter in our morning service and move on to the second one right now, the central part of the service, when we bring the Torah into our congregation. For that purpose, first of all, I'd like to invite Stephen Hyman to come join me on the bima. Stephen's going to take on a very special role. It's called a gabbai. And that means that he's going to basically be a bit of our master of ceremonies, our facilitator, and also going to track the Torah chanting that each of us go through. I'll be doing it for Stephen. Stephen will be taking on for the next two Aliyot. At this moment, I'm going to also invite the family to the bima. I'm going to ask the grandparents, Murray and Sandy, to join us, as well as Brian and Lindsay, and of course, Carson. I'm going to ask you to rise as we open the ark.
In kamocha ve'Elohim Adonai, v'en kemasecha, malchutecha, malachut kol olamim, u'memshaltecha bechol dor v'ador. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai yimloch, leolam va'ed, Adonai oz li'amo yitein, Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom, Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom, avar rachamim, etiva b'rtzonecha et Zion, tivnei chamot Yerushalayim, tivnei chamot Yerushalayim, ki yevecha levod batachnu, melech Aram v'nisa, Adon olamim. On page 364. Ki emitzion teitze Torah, ki emitzion teitze Torah, udevar Adonai mi Yerushalayim. Baruch Shenatan Torah, Torah. Baruch Shenatan Torah, Torah. Udevav le'amo Yisrael bekidushato. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo, Gadlul Adonai iti u'romema Shemo Yachdav. Lecha Adonai Hagdula v'Hagvura v'Hatifer v'Hanetzach v'Haod Ki chol b'shamayim u'va'aretz Lecha Adonai Hagdadocha v'Hamitnaseh lechol lerosh Romemu Adonai Eloheinu V'hishtachavu leha kodesho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu. V'hishtachavu leha kodesho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. Romemu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romemu Adonai Eloheinu V'hishtachavu leHakodesho.
Please be seated. So you notice we brought out two Torah scrolls, and there's a special reason that it's important to the family. Murray and Sandy were very close friends of the Kriegers, who were part of this congregation for many years before they moved back to the United States. And the Kriegers always talked about the importance of the Holocaust Scroll and their role in bringing it to Winnipeg. This is a scroll that came out of the Czechoslovakian community, with 1,500 scrolls were hidden for the war and eventually found their way back into sight again into England, where they eventually made their way to congregations across Canada. The scroll that we brought out was scroll 661 from a small community in Czechoslovakia that did not survive, the Jewish community did not survive the war. We're very honored to have it in our presence, and in honoring the importance of that Torah to Sandy and to Murray and to the Kriegers, who are past members, we wanted to make it symbolically at least part of the service. It spent many years in very poor storage areas, in very humid areas, and the scroll itself is very fragile. So we made the specific decision not to read it. We only do it on extremely rare circumstances. It's misshapen and transparent, beautiful Torah, but quite old. It's 98 years old. It was created in 1923. But having said that, we're going in many respects from Lador Vador, from generation to generation. And what we've done right now is brought up the newest generation of the Torah. It's called the Irmaten Torah, which was written by one of our congregants, the first female Soferet in Canada, and she was the first person to write a Torah, and she did it for our congregation in her last days, simply as a gift to our congregation. It's a beautiful and stunning Torah. The family's gotten a chance to look at it, to read from it. We'll have a chance to experience together. In many respects, just as we've gone generationally to generationally with the Bar and Bar Mitzvah process over the centuries and the millennia, so too our Torahs are being passed down generation to generation as well. So we're honored today that one of our newest members of our congregation and our Jewish community gets to read from that Torah today. Okay, so with that, we're going to move right now to the Torah reading itself. I do want to mention something before we start, and that's that normally the Torah is written in 54 pieces, spread out over the course of the year. Right now, we would normally be, as I mentioned, in Ekev, which is the second parasha in the 5th book of the Torah. However, Carson was actually preparing originally for a bar mitzvah in April, and obviously that didn't take place because of where we were, and we moved the ceremony today, and that's what allows you all to be here with us. There's an interesting and beautiful tradition, rabbinic tradition, of what we do when we miss a Torah reading. It's declared as a lost parasha, and it can happen because of a catastrophe, a flood, whatever circumstances may mean that a Torah can't be read in a congregation, and it's brought forward at the later date and added to what they would normally do. So we never miss the Torah portion that's read. So rather than having Carson go through the terror of having to redo everything and start all over again, we're introducing today the idea of the lost Torah parsha. And that's going to be primarily the focus of the service today when we come to the Torah reading. Having said that, I'm still obliged to basically bring up at least the ideas of what the Ekev would be. We're not going to read both, but we're going to do it. At the very least, I can discuss to you what is actually in the Torah reading today. So the idea of the continuity of the Torah, as we do every week here, we don't necessarily read it, but we always talk about it. We can still maintain that particular tradition. So Ekev actually means because, and the whole 5th book is actually a series of 3 long speeches that Moses gives to the people of Israel. And large part of it is the retelling of the stories that came beforehand. And in particular, we get Moses' idea of that experience on Sinai. Beforehand, we read about the people's experience from the ground up and what they were experiencing and all the terrors and Moses leaving and coming back. Here we have Moses' personal experience. And as I wrote in my rabbi's message this week, we learn a lot about what happens when we add perspectives to a story. And because we hear of Moses' emotional and spiritual experience, we get to see how truly, because of the profound spiritual experience and why he truly was upset that he spent all that time in that spiritual sacred presence and was all taken away from him when he saw the golden calf below. So Moses is actually spending a lot of time in this particular pasha reminding us of our past issues, but he also reminds us as well that he still begged for forgiveness for the people of Israel and was convinced God essentially to give the second set of tablets as well. The stories continue on along those kinds of ways, and Moses actually describes not only are we coming into a land of milk and honey, but he also describes the seven species that are part of Israel at that time: the wheat, the barley, the grapevines, the figs, the pomegranates, the olive oil, and the dates. And we realize that we really are coming into a land of plenty at that time. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, Ekev also touches on briefly, giving us one of the prayers that our rabbis considered were so essential to Judaism that they included it as part of the Shema. So that's going to be the story of Ekev, and now we'll move on to what we're going to do today. And Kedoshim is the parsha today. It's actually right in the very, very middle of the Torah, right in the middle of the third book. And oddly enough, it's actually, I was quite delighted when I found out that that was the parsha that Carson's going to read, because this is ethics, Jewish ethics 101. It is the best Torah parsha in terms of just, in the middle of all the strange stuff going on with the priests, it just stops for a moment and it starts off with the line, Kedoshim, you shall be holy, for I, your God, am holy. And it's the whole idea of how we're created in God's image, and it speaks so much to our incredible potential as human beings. And basically what we have after that is just a series on and on and on of magnificent statements that really define the Jewish experience, actually what it is to be a mensch, which will come up later on as part of our conversations. Dozens of mitzvot, in which we're talking about the mitzvah of charity, the principle of equality before the law, which Shabbat is, sexual morality, honesty in business, honor and awe of one's parents, and the sacredness of life. And we also have in this particular parsha, the great, Rabbi Akiva said it, but he took it from this particular parsha, and Wahila said this is the entire Torah and Restless commentary, love your fellows as yourself. Essentially, the golden rule comes out of this particular parsha as well. Again, it's a magnificent Torah parsha. It's long, and what we do here at Temple Shalom is that we encourage the family. I've sat down with Brian and with Steve and with Carson, and we went through the Torah parsha, and we asked Carson which part of the Torah of this whole Torah means the most to you, and we chose a piece in the middle that we'll be reading today. And we have 3 Torah readers. We'll have Stephen, his uncle, and we'll have Brian, his father, and then finally Carson will be reading each of the 3 Aliyot, and we'll be honoring family members as we go through this. So with that, I'm going to ask for the honor of the Aliyot. I'm going to, reading the blessings on the first Aliyah, I'm going to invite up Mary Hyman, Misha ben Shlomo, and Sandy Hyman, Sonia ben Shoshana, to take the honor of the first Aliyah. Stephen is behind me. There he is. Okay. Stephen will basically help organize the rest of this as we go through it, and I'll be following along while Stephen reads.
Come closer. Can they remove their mask to say the
Yeah,
blessing?
please remove the masks. And you can use this microphone here for the purposes of the, here's your sheet. And just feel free to talk to the microphone.
Yeah, guys, not yet. Come over here. Okay, no. You can take your towels. You're just going to give a kiss right over here. Very good. Excellent.
Baruch Adonai HaBarach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bacher banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Hold it here.
Amen. Lo tasu avel b'mishpat, lo tisa panei dov, lo tehadar b'nei gadol, b'tzedek tishpot amitecha, lo telech rachil ba'amecha, lo tamod al dam re'echa ni Adonai, lo tisnad achicha bilvavecha, hocheach tochiach et amitecha, velo tisa lav chet, lo tikam velo titor, et b'nei amecha, Ve'ahavta l'rechacha kamocha, ani Adonai, et chukotai tishmeru, b'amtecha lo tarbia kilaim, sadcha lo tazria kilaim, uveged kilaim shatnez, lo yalelecha, v'ish kishkav, et isha shichvat zerah. V'hishivcha nechrafet leish, ve'afdela niftata, o chupasha lo natan la, bikoret tehiyeh, lo yumatu ki lo chupasha, vevi. And Ashmol Adonai el petach ohel moed el Hasham v'chaper ala kohen vel Hasham lifnei Adonai achatato asher chata v'nislach lo mechatato asher chata.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam natan b'chenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
So we just read the first piece of the first Aliyah. Just want to give you some sense of some of the things that are in it. We'll describe in a moment what's also going to happen in the second reading as well. This one talks about you shall commit no injustices and judgment. We're talking about here the court systems. You shouldn't favor a poor person or overly respect a great man. You're supposed to judge everybody equally. We're not supposed to gossip. As a matter of fact, we're not supposed to stand by while shedding somebody else's blood, and that's interpreted in Broadway. Not only should we not gossip, but it's equally great a sin to listen to gossip as well. So we're again seeing the incredible power of how it is to live in this human world. We're not supposed to hate. We're not supposed to fantasize about revenge. We're not supposed to crossbreed animals. We're not supposed to, and this continues on. The second parsha, the second reading today, talks about when we plant a new tree, we shouldn't harvest it too quickly. We should wait 3 years. And in the fourth year, when we have the first harvest, we don't take it ourselves, we give it away. Here it's talking about giving away to God, but you can imagine those first fruits actually going to charity and to taking care of other people. We're not supposed to follow, I guess we call omens. I guess it would be following astrology and all those other kind of practices, getting caught up and moving away from finding alternative forms of spirituality. We're kind of realizing the centrality of our Jewish tradition to ourselves. We're not supposed to do tattoos. And there's many of the conversations here will remind us of life in Israel in the Orthodox community. We're not supposed to round off the corners of our heads, and we're not supposed to draw the edges of our beards. We start to see where the idea of payos come from. Anyway, it's beautiful paragraphs again, and of course, we're supposed to rise before a venerable person and respect the elderly, and you shall fear your God. I am your God. So with that, I'm going to turn to Brian and Lindsay. We're going to come up for the purposes of taking on the second Aliyah, and Brian himself has done this probably a number of years ago at his own bar mitzvah, but Brian will be reading the Torah for the second Aliyah.
Okay, before you read.
I don't know where you are. It's around there. Baruch Adonai Hamborach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Olam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Hamborach Leolam Vaed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'natan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Okay, Lindsay, you're going to hold over here.
No, do you see it? I know that, but I don't see it. Yeah. And al techalel et bitcha lehaznota, v'lo tizna haaretz umala haaretz zima, et shabtotai Tishmeru umikdashi tira'u ani Adonai. Al tafnu al ha'ovot ve'al ha'yedanim et tevakshu letama ani Adonai Elohechem mipnei seva takum vehadarta pene zaken ve'yartam Elohecha ani Adonai. Asher natan lanu Torah temet v'chaye olam nata betochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
I heard for a moment, my sheets were heading under Stevens. So I did want to introduce Brian and Lindsay by their Hebrew names. I'll make a point of mentioning them afterwards because I think we honor the traditions of passages when we do that. Brian, of course, is Baruch ben Misha v'Sonia, and Lindsay is Shoshana bat Abraham v'Sarah. We're going to pause for a moment, as we do always in the middle of the Torah service, and that is to have a prayer for healing, the Misha Barach, which is on page, I believe it's 370, 371 of your Mishkan Tefillah. The whole idea behind embedding in the middle is that we know that so many people are suffering physically, emotionally, spiritually, both in these times and just because of the nature of what life gives us along the way. It could be you, the people closest to you. So we have a few up, and the idea, of course, is to do this prayer surrounded by Torah. It seems to give it even a greater strength that when we do these things, it's generations, not just those present here, who are bringing forward the power of those prayers. It's our custom here, if you're online, either on Zoom or on Facebook, to use the chat box to put in any names. The alternative here, too, is as I pass by my hand over you, feel free to call out the names of those that matter to you, as long as you have their permission to do so. And, of course, otherwise, keep the names close to you and in your hearts.
Misha Barach Avotenu Mikora Bracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength who bless the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Misha Barach Imotenu Mikora Bracha Leavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah Shulema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
We're going to continue now with moving towards the third Aliyah. And this is going to be done by Carson. I'll come to him in a moment. Just to give you a sense of some of the Torah, the power of the Torah's words in the third reading, which Carson will be reading. When a stranger sojourns with you, you shall not taunt him. The stranger who sojourns with you shall be as a native from amongst you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Again, we're getting that sense of our obligation to the communities around us, the idea of whether it's colonialism or whether it's where we sat as immigrants ourselves, remembering that whole phenomenon and really understanding what our relationship is with our neighbors. A number of rules here regarding business practices, and finally, you shall observe all my statutes and all my ordinances and fulfill them, for I am your God. And with that, I'm going to, in a moment, invite up Carson. Stephen's here as well. Okay, thank you. Yamod Yahamod, Yamod Yahamod, 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 Chaim Avraham ben Baruch Shoshana, Maftir, Chazak, 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 Chazak. Carson, Macaulay, Hyman, Chaim Avraham ben Baruch Shoshana. This is your Aliyah.
So you're going to come here, you're going to give a kiss with your toes at Achiyadur. Perfect. Okay, then here's what we're going to do. Take this. You're going to come over here. Brian, hold this for him. Okay, go for it.
Baruch Hu Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
So you're going to grab the yod. You know where you are. You're doing great.
Vehi yagur ita ger ba'artzehem, lo tonu oto, ki ezra mikem yihye lachem, hager hagaritem, ve'hafta lo kamocha, ki gerim haitem be'eretz mitzrayim, ani Adonai Elohehem, lo tasiu avava mishpat, bamidah, bamishkal, Vamsura Mosne Tzedek Yivnei Tzedek Ephod Tzedek V'in Tzedek Yelachem Ani Adonai Elohehem Asher Atzatitem Me'eretz Mitzrayim Ushmartem et kol hikotai et kol mishpotai V'esitem otem Ani Adonai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam nata betochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
We move right now to returning the Torah, the Hagbah and the Glila, and for that, I'm going to invite up John and Jeff, two more uncles. There's an interesting story here about this. As I was talking with Stephen and Brian about offering these honors to kind of complete the team here along the way, and apparently all three of them are negotiating which one has the worst bad back of the three of them to get out of this, because the Torah gets raised for a long period of time. I don't know how they've settled it up, so I'm going to let the three of them figure it out. So the Hagbah is the rising of the Torah, turning it around so you can all see the words of the Torah physically by yourselves. And normally it's done about 3 columns wide just to make sure that we really get a sense of it. It's a magnificent text, and it really brings the Torah present to us, since you can't all come up and see the Torah personally. Please rise.
Zot HaTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai beyad Moshe.
Those words themselves come out of the Torah, right near the end, and it actually says to us that God dictated the Torah into Moses' ear, and Moses wrote it. Please be seated. Wrote it out by his hands, and it's an interesting tradition. Reform takes a slightly different perspective, as does the conservative movement, that was probably written much later by a number of people. But there's still that sense of the power of the words that matter to us. So even though it's not quite our specific halacha or our way of understanding Torah, it is still very important. We truly enjoy saying those words because it really impresses the solemnity. We look at it as a sacred document, inspired by the tradition of Sinai, as understood many centuries later, but not necessarily specifically following it word for word. So it's, again, it is a central document in all of the Jewish denominations, no matter whether or not we specifically believe in it as a word-by-word description at that time. So in a moment, I'm going to be asking Carson to come up and get prepared to start on his Haftarah. The Haftarah is an added reading that the rabbis have chosen that represents a different understanding of the Torah from either the prophets or from the writings afterwards, the Ketuvim. And the idea, and where the tradition came from, is that there have been periods of persecution of the Jews when they were not allowed to read from the Torah. So these were alternative readings that were added in afterwards, and Carson will be giving us a small taste of a different idea of Torah. Carson?
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nvi'im tovim v'ratza b'divreihem hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah uv'Moshe avdo v'Yisrael amo v'nvi'ei ha'emet v'tzedek. Halo kivnei kushim atem li b'nei Yisrael ne'um Adonai. Halot Yisrael haliti me'eretz Mitzrayim ufleshi mikator vera mikir. Hine achne Adonai Elohim B'macha chata'a Yishmadeti ota me'el pnei hadama efes ki lo ashmid et beit Yaakov ne'um Adonai ki hine ochni metzavech v'nati bechol hagoyim et beit Yisrael Kisher hino avakara v'lo yafot zaror eretz. B'cherev yamutu kol hata'e ami hamrim lo tagish v'tachdim bodinu hara. Beyom ha'u akim etukat David hanofelet begarti et pritihen persitav akim behuti akime olam liman yershu et shirit adom v'chol hagoyim asher nikra shimei alihem ne'um Adonai oseh zot. Hine amim ba'im ne'um Adonai ונגש הורש בקוצר, ודרך עננים במסך הזרח, ויתו הרים עסיס והוגלות תתמוגגנה. ושבתי את שבות עמי ישראל, ובנו ערים נשמות וישבו, נשיאו כמרים, וישאו את ינם, וישאו גנות, ואכלו את פריהם. ודמעתם אדמתם, ולא יתנשו עוד, מאדמתם אשר נטעה לכם, אמר אדוני אלוהיך. ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר כל העולמים, צדיק בכל דורות, האל הנאמן, האומר ועושה, המדבר מקיים, שכל דבריו אמת וצדק. על התורה ועל העבודה ועל הניבנים ועל יום השבת הזה, שנתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו, לקדושה ולמנוחה, לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל, אדוני אלוהינו, אנחנו מודים לך, ומרתים אותך, יתברך שמך, פי כל חי, תמיד לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, מקדש השבת.
Yes. Mazel tov and mazel tov and siman tov, siman tov and mazel tov and mazel tov and siman tov, siman tov and mazel tov and siman tov. Yeilanu, 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 Olekol Yisrael. Yeilanu, Yeilanu, Olekol Yisrael. Yeilanu, Yeilanu, Olekol Yisrael. Yeilanu, Yeilanu, Olekol Yisrael. Yasher Koach. Now we're going to return to Torah. I'm going to ask you all to rise and turn to page 374, Great Hyman.
Yitzchayim hi למחזיקים בה, ותומכיה מאושת, דרכיה דרכי נועם, וכל נתיבותיה שלום. השיבנו אדוני אליך ונשובה, חדש ימינו, חדש ימינו, חדש ימינו כקדם.
Thank you. Please be seated. This is where I don't get to do a sermon or a Devar Torah, and instead I'm going to invite up the newest member of our adult Jewish community, Carson, Hyman, to pass on his words of wisdom to us.
Good morning, everyone. My Torah reading is from Parshat Kiddushin. It tells a story about the Jews after they left Egypt and starts off with the statement from God, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord, is holy." This statement is followed by many commandments to be followed by the Jewish people. Some of them were follow the Sabbath, honor your mother and father, do not worship idols, do not steal, respect your elders, do not curse a deaf person, and do not put a stumbling block before a blind person. Eat what you slaughter within 2 days and burn the rest in the fire on the third day. The commandment that I want to discuss is the golden rule. You should treat your neighbors as you want to be treated. This is an important rule because if we did not follow this rule, the world would be in chaos. An example of this is when Moses loses his temper on his fellow people. This shows a rule being violated in modern times. This rule is violated when we treat others unfairly, try to gain an advantage, and simply treat others with disrespect. Life is much easier if you treat others how you want to be treated. An example of people following the golden rule in real life involves helping others without pay. For my mitzvah project, I helped neighbors on the street with various tasks, shoveling dirt, moving rocks, and assisting with basic improvements to their yard. I did not get paid for my services, except for the odd ice cream. I believe if I need help in the future, my community will offer to help me just as I offer to help them. Helping others and even offering to help improves relationships between neighbors. People I helped were very thankful for my effort and free labor. More importantly, the positive feelings I have from the experience of helping others makes me want to help others even more. In the future, I will think of ways to help my neighbors and members of my own family, including my sister Lachlan. I'll also try to treat her the way I want to be treated. Wish me luck. The golden rule is associated with everything in life. It is not just for people living in your neighborhood, but for everyone in the world we live in. I feel like this rule could be written differently. Instead of treating your neighbors like you want to be treated, you should treat all people like you want to be treated. I know that's oversimplifying things, but being a good person to everyone and putting forward your best effort in everything you do will improve your life and make the world a better place. In the future, I'll focus on my own actions and hopefully learn from the mistakes I will make along the way. There are many people I need to thank on this special day in my life. Rabbi Allen and Morris C., I want to thank you both for teaching me valuable lessons and for preparing me to become a bar mitzvah. Cantor Len, thank you for teaching me numerous blessings and songs and for making me more comfortable with the service. I really enjoyed singing with you in your screen porch, and I'm going to miss our weekly chats since you're the only person I know that enjoys talking NBA basketball as much as I do. The patience and guidance I received from both you and Rabbi Allen was much appreciated. I now have a greater understanding of the service, the synagogue, and my place in it. I'm going to miss you guys. Uncle Stephen, where do I begin? You showed a lot of patience teaching me for what seemed like forever. You never got mad at me when I misplaced my materials, and you were an expert teacher of my Torah reading and Haftorah. I owe you a great deal for your help and will miss our weekly Zoom meetings. I would not have reached this day without you. I'm very lucky to have very supportive aunts, uncles, and cousins, and look forward to getting to know you all over again, now that the restrictions have been lifted a bit. Uncle Jeff and Auntie E, I'm always able to come over to your house when I need medical attention, or after suffering a sports injury. Uncle John and Auntie Candace, I'll always feel good in your company as a result of your kindness. Auntie Candace, I always enjoy our talks, and Uncle John, I always enjoy your laugh and humor. Uncle Stephen and Auntie Alana, I'll always feel comfortable with both of you and have benefited from your love and support over the years. Uncle Alex, you're more like an older brother or a best friend than an uncle. You introduced me to Marvel movies and junk food. You're always teaching me about life and have made me a better person. You are always there for me when I need you. Thank you for being you. Mom and Dad, thank you for helping me with my bar mitzvah and for being terrific parents, friends, and role models. I could not have done this without you. Dad, you drove me around to all my lessons, and Mom, you spent a great deal of time planning my bar mitzvah and making me feel special. Mom, thank you for supporting me and helping me and being my #1 fan. Even if you are sick or something is going on at work, or even if you're having a really bad day, you always find time for me. Lachlan, although we fight like an old married couple, I value your support and friendship. As far as sisters go, you are not that bad. I also want to thank my grandparents who have done a lot for me over the years. Bubby and Zeta, I appreciate your love and support. I enjoy it when you cheer me on at soccer and appreciate your love with school, work, rides, and for always being there for me. You both are truly special people. Grandpa, I cherish all the hockey we talk about. I feel your love and support whenever you're around. Grandma, I'll always cherish our talks and think you are one of the nicest people I ever met. You make my day better when I see you and feel you, and I feel you are a great role model. I hope to see more of you and Grandpa in the near future. Last but not least, thank you for everyone coming to my bar mitzvah and sharing this special day with me and my family. For those of you on Zoom, I hope you're wearing your pajamas. I wish I was. Shabbat Shalom.
Well, that was really special. First of all, it sounded like a farewell speech. It's going to miss us forever. I wanted to let you know that. Where are you going? No, I want to let you know that today's just the beginning of your journey, not the end of it. So the time we've spent together, both for Led and me, has been quite remarkable, getting to know you as a human being. And I want to let you know that you are part of this congregation, and today's the first day of the rest of your life as a Jew, not your last day. So coming to this, it's an interesting turning point. It's like when people get married, they don't just wander off into the sunset. They make the commitment and recommitment along the way. You described in beautiful terms what your family means to you, and I certainly remember our first conversations when I asked you about what was important to you. Who are the important people in your lives and why? And I found it interesting. At that particular time, you talked about 3 people, and over time it expanded. You talked about a teacher in school, a particular teacher, who you said was really solid, had specific expectations of people, and you really liked her drive and her intensity and her preference to bring out the best in other people. And you talked about your parents in very similar kinds of ways. And I went, it's interesting, of all the values we could choose, it was about that kind of intensity of experience, how you're really impressed by people who had drive and wanted to move forward in their lives. And at that time I said, it's going to be an interesting journey to go through this whole process of you preparing your bar mitzvah because of those kinds of values that you're bringing forward. And it very much reflects on the things you love to do. I didn't know about the NBA things, but we've certainly talked soccer a fair bit. And that intensity and how many of our times together, we were working around your practices over time. And very often those were the framings that we used in our conversations over the past year. The idea of what happens, it's not, we don't get given things in life. We get the results from when we do the work. And that seems to be a really strong driving force in your life. And for those quiet reasons, I know you're going to be very successful. One of the things we did together is I decided we weren't going to do a charity project, because charity's like, here's money going somewhere, but it's a momentary buy-in. And we talked about Menschlichkeit instead, what it is to be a mensch. And I gave Carson a project pretty early on. And it was to go talk to the people in his family. So what does a mensch mean to you? And I told him to write it all down afterwards. He said every person smiled, and every person gave him very similar things along the way. And I found that Carson almost immediately absorbed those things into who he was. I saw huge changes in the time we were together as you really kind of focused in. Your speech today, your sermon today, was so illuminating, so understanding of what it is to actually step forward into the world. And of all the ethical standards, the fact that you chose to love your neighbors yourself was based on the idea of the Mensch project that we talked about was just do things quietly for other people. Don't do them because you're expecting a reward. And that was the whole idea what Menschlichkeit is. It's sometimes, and for me, it was my grandmother, one of the quietest people in my life, who was the real mensch in my life. And you seem to have found those values in the people around you, and it very much reflected in the project that you did. You weren't interested. You're not that guy who wants to be out there and being a big ego guy. You're quietly managing your life, and I think you brought out the best in me. Yeah, I think you brought out the best in Land, and you bring out the best in the people around you. And that to me is really a sign of what young Jewish adulthood was. And that to me is what we were hoping your experience of the bar mitzvah would be. These are great lessons to carry forward, and never forget those quiet messages. You owned that stuff. This didn't sound like somebody else writing your speech for you. You owned this. And I was really watching your personality come forward. It's consistent with everything we've seen over the past year of working with you. And I'm truly, as much as I'm honored, as much as you're honored to be here with us, I'm truly honored to have gotten to know you better. And may you truly be a blessing, in our community and with your family and for everybody who gets to know you. Normally at this particular time, I would end this off with the priestly blessings. I'd either have a talit overhead or I'd have my hands on the shoulders, but COVID isn't going to let us particularly do that. You'll notice there are other changes in the service. Rather than taking the Torah around, we simply circused around here. We're picking up the symbols of all of these things. So Aaron, our first priest, had a series of 3 priestly blessings that he gave to the people of Israel. Over time, it's passed on to the rabbis to do the same. And it's in that vein that I want to pass on 3 particular special readings, which really kind of express the holiness of the day, and more importantly, the holiness of who you are. And that was the first line of Kodashim. You are holy because God is holy. Okay, so as I say these blessings, I want you to keep these things in mind and to really own these things and to own the special person of who you are and the impact you have on the people around you. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless you and keep you. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chunecha. May God's face always shine upon you and be gracious to you. And Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God lift up God's countenance towards you and always, always grant you comfort and peace. Together let us say Amen. And with that, I'm going to move on to the next piece, which is, you grab a seat again. You're almost done, buddy. This is the best part ever. This is that, phew, I just have to hang around for a couple of blessings afterwards. This is great. So what we'll do right now is we're moving towards the closing part of the service. I'm going to invite up two people, Alex Gilroy, who's Lindsay's brother, to do the prayer for the state of Israel, and Julie Plett, who will do the prayer for our country. Alex and Julie, please come and join me here at the mic. Thank you.
Prayer for our country. Our God and God of our ancestors, we ask your blessings for our country, for its government, for its leaders and advisors, and for all who exercise just and rightful authority. Teach them insights of your Torah, that they may administer all affairs of state fairly, that peace and security, happiness and prosperity, justice and freedom may forever abide in our midst. Creator of flesh, bless all of the inhabitants of our country with your spirit. May citizens of all races and creeds forge a common bond in true harmony to banish all hatred and bigotry and to safeguard the ideals and free institutions which are the price and glory of our country. May this land under your providence be an influence for good throughout the world, uniting all people in peace and freedom and helping them to fulfill the vision of your prophet. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they experience war anymore. And let us say, Amen.
Our Father in heaven, rock and redeemer of the people Israel, bless the state of Israel with its promise of redemption. Shield it with your love. Spread over it the shelter of your peace. Guide its leaders and advisors with your light and your truth. Help them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land. Deliver them. Crown their efforts with triumph. Bless the land with peace and its inhabitants with lasting joy. Let us say, Amen.
Moving to Aleinu. I'll ask you to rise on page 586 for Aleinu, and we'll continue to stay standing after that as we move into the Mourner's Kaddish. Page 586.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסר הארץ, ומושב יקרא בשמיים ממעל, ושכינת עוזו בגבי מרומים, הוא אלוהינו אין עוד. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. Page 591. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו
We'll do a reading on page 593 as we enter the time when we recall those who've left us. In nature's ebb and flow, God's eternal law abides. When tears dim our vision or grief clouds our understanding, we often lose sight of God's eternal plan. Yet we know that growth and decay, life and death, all reveal a divine purpose. God, who is our support in the struggles of life, is also our hope in death. We have set God before us and shall not despair. In God's hands are the souls of all the living and the spirits of all flesh. Under God's protection we abide, and by God's love are we comforted. O life of our life, soul of our soul, cause your light to shine into our hearts and fill our spirits with abiding trust in you. At the bottom of page 597, our thoughts turn to those who have departed this earth, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss and of life and death. Again, for those online, feel free to add in the names of any of those whose memories you're honoring today, either in Facebook or on Zoom. I will be reading out a list momentarily and then ask you to add any
That's very funny. Never saw these before.
Can we unmute the rabbi?
Vitadar, Vitale, Vitalal, Shmei de Kudisha, Brichu, Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, Tushbechata v'nechemata, Da'amiran bi'alma v'imru, Amen. Yehi shlam araba min shemaya, V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, Amen. Oseh shalom b'imramav, Huya seh shalom, Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, Amen. Zicharnam livracha, may their names truly be for a blessing. And at this time, we're moving towards the fun stuff. Please be seated. I'm going to call up Ruth Livingston, one of our temple co-presidents, for announcements and a gift from the congregation. We're not doing announcements.
So, on behalf of the congregation,
Use the microphone.
I want to talk to him.
Get close to the microphone. People.
On behalf of the congregation and board of Temple Shalom, I want first to wish you Mazel Tov and your family for a really, really amazingly well-conducted bar mitzvah. Your learning and the demonstration of it has been quite wonderful. We have for you a certificate of bar mitzvah and a small gift that we hope will become part of your collection of Judaica along with your talis to commemorate this day. Thanks. You're most welcome.
There are just a couple of announcements that I recall from last night. Let me see. Ruthie Sudak Maman and David Vamos will be leading our regular Friday night services, which will be next Friday evening at 6:15. The following week, we're going back outdoors again for our third summer service on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock at the Rady Center and the field outside. So feel free to join us or pass it on to anybody that you know. Right now, we're really at the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the family to the beam. I'm going to call up Brian and Lindsay and Lachlan because we're going to do blessings on the wine, blessings on the bread, and finally the final piece, the down alone. So thank you, which will be on 6:25. Brian, Lindsay, and Lachlan, please join Carson up here. These things, by the way, normally after a meal, we have an oneg or a meal away. And we found that we prefer to do the blessings up here rather than downstairs because we never get down in time to do them there. So the idea here is that these are the things we do before any meal, and we just would love to know, notionally we know that we are not gathering together as a community afterwards because of the pandemic regulations, but we certainly anticipate that you will be sitting in your homes, grabbing lunches together and thinking of the special day as a community, and with that we'll do the blessings before the meal here on all of our behalves. Please do.
Join me if you want. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Rabbi Allen, Cantor Len, the tech crew, consisting of Judith Hubner, Ruth Livingston, and Linda Freed, those in the congregation this morning, and those who have joined us online. I've asked on my own accord, believe it or not, to share some words with you this morning about Carson. And for those of you that do know me, speaking in front of audiences of any size is not something that is in my comfort zone. My brother Stephen loves an audience of any size. And if there is no one there, he probably just talks to himself. But John, Jeff, and I would rather be on the sidelines and let Stephen do the talking. But on this special occasion, I'm glad to do so. So what can I say about the bar mitzvah boy, Carson? Carson is quiet and reserved, except when he is alone with his family. He is smart, he is definitely inquisitive, and he has loads and loads of empathy. Carson cares about everybody and everything. Last week, Carson was concerned about a fly that got into the house. He did not agree with the way I dealt with the issue. Most of all, Carson loves the underdog. For those of you who love the Jets, Carson's favorite Winnipeg Jet hockey player was Laurent Brossoit, the backup goalie. Carson and I spent countless hours over the last few years debating who should be the Jets' starting goalie. And if we're up to Carson, Connor Hellebuck and his enormous contract would be on the bench. Lucky for me, but not for Carson, Brossoit has left the Jets. Speaking of underdogs, Carson is always eager to help someone in need. It may surprise a few of you that I get into trouble from time to time when Lindsay or Lachlan disagree with my actions or behavior. Carson is quick to defend me, which usually makes things worse. In any event, I know that Carson has my back when necessary. Carson's favorite expression is, "I have a question." He says it at least 25 times a day. When he says this, I'm prepared for what comes next. I know from experience that Carson has more than one question. He has many, many questions, with several follow-up questions, most of which deal with topics that I don't know about or do not understand. My court experience with judges have prepared me somewhat for these situations. Carson is tougher than most judges in Manitoba, but he's not as tough as Judge Sharma. She is tough on crime. Carson demands an immediate response to every single one of his questions, no matter what you are doing. He wants to enhance his knowledge and experience. My usual response to Carson's barrage of questions is to advise him to Google it, since his interest and level of understanding has surpassed me long ago. Carson's favorite topic of conversation is NBA basketball. He knows all the players and all the teams. He wants to know my favorite player on every team during every era of basketball. He got mad at me the other day when I couldn't name one player on the Charlotte Hornets. I didn't even know Charlotte still had a basketball team. Carson is a very hard worker, which is shown in the classroom and on the soccer field. Sure, Carson likes his breaks, but he manages to put forward his best effort and is dedicated to the task at hand. Lindsay and I worked very hard, and we both had great role models in our parents. Carson understands the importance of hard work, as well as the importance to help others. Throughout the day, Carson asks how I am doing and whether I am stressed. I'm not sure of his motives at times, but I know he truly cares about others, and especially his family. Over the past several months, I have thought about my own bar mitzvah, which occurred approximately 33 years ago. Although Carson's bar mitzvah is quite different than my own, the process remains the same. A bar mitzvah is a rite of passage, and it confirms that you are of age to become a contributing member of society. Carson, you have great potential, and you have so many people in your corner to provide you with love and support. I know you will do great things and will continue to make your family proud. You made us very proud today, and it is clear your hard work has paid off. Carson, I have seen tremendous growth from you over the past year and believe that your teachers at Grant Park, including Ms. Curry and Mr. Semenik, as well as Morrissey, Rabbi Allen, Cantor Len, and Uncle Stephen, have helped you realize your potential. Keep up the good work. Lindsay, I want to thank you for all that you are and for preparing for this event under very unique circumstances. You are a remarkable person with endless amounts of energy. Our family is able to function in chaos as a result of your tireless effort. For example, while preparing for the bar mitzvah, you found time to deal with the sale of our cottage and purchase of a new one. Preparing for the bar mitzvah and working 15 hours a day was not enough of a challenge for you. Don't worry, Lindsay, we can relax for about 3 months before we start preparations for Lachlan's bar mitzvah. Lachlan, you have put up with a lot over the past few months, and it will be your turn before you know it. You better call Uncle Stephen to set up your lessons. He is waiting for you. Or maybe he needs a little bit of a break. It is necessary for me to thank all of the members of the Gilroy and Hyman families. This includes all of our aunts, uncles, and cousins. I am so thankful for your love and support over the years. You guys are great. A special thank you also goes out to those who shared this special day with our family. In closing, I have to thank Temple Shalom. The synagogue is a hidden gem that should be cherished. I think it was about 4 years ago, we tried out the synagogue during a Friday night service during the summer. I have never felt more comfortable and at home than during a service here. A special thank you to Judith, Ruth, Linda, Rabbi Allen, and Cantor Len, who have been driving forces behind the ongoing success of this wonderful place. Thank you very much, and Shabbat Shalom.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen.
Amen. Is it?
Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. We give thanks to God for bread. Our voices join song together as our prayer is humbly said. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Now it's time for a final tune. I'll ask Glenn to step up with Carson and the family as the family leads us in Adon Olam. I'm not sure which version. There's about 48 of them out there, and I know that they were negotiating 2 nights ago. So you guys know where you're at? This is on page 625.
Yes, introducing the Hyman Quartet, otherwise known as Temple Shalom Choir, is going to close our service with the closing hymn Adon Olam, and you'll find it on page 625. And Lachlan picked the melody, we think. And it goes a lot like this, with gusto. Right, Lachlan? Here we go. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra Le'et Nasa B'chefza Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra Adon Olam
Ve'acharei Kiflot HaKol Levado Himloch Nora Adon Olam Ve'hu Haya Ve'hu Hoveh Ve'hu Yeh B'tifara Adon Olam
Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra Le'et Nasa B'chefza Kol
Azai Melech Shemo Nikra Adon Olam Ve'hu Echad Ve'ein Sheni Le'hamshilo Le'hachpira Adon Olam Ve'li Reshit Ve'li Tachlit Ve'lo Ha'oz Ve'hamisra Adon Olam Ve'hu Eli Ve'chai Goli Ve'tzur Chevli Ve'etzara Adon Olam Ve'hu Nisi Umanosli Menachtosi B'yom Echra Adon Olam Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra Le'et Nasa B'chefza Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra Adon Olam B'yado Avki Ruchi Ve'et Dishan Ve'a'ira Adon Olam Ve'im Ruchi Geviyati Adonai Ve'lo Ira Adon Olam.
So from everyone up here on the Bima, the Hyman family from Canterland, Yudo, and me from Temple Shalom, we truly wish you all a beautiful Shabbat Shalom, truly a day of peace and of joy. May you find great comfort over the rest of the day. Celebrate, we'll be brought together as a community here and online. And let us remember the spirit as we move forward into new and changing times, and the spirit of hope we have today as we experience Carson joining our community as a young Jewish man. Shabbat Shalom.